everyone, welcome to another video. Sorry that I haven't updated in a while, but I decided to take a little bit of a break with all the craziness going on at the moment. And just so you guys know, I know you've probably seen it all across different social media, but it is absolutely fine for you guys to take a break if you need to. Nobody is expecting you guys to be perfect throughout this time. It's unprecedented. We've never been through anything like this before, so don't feel like you have to push yourselves all the time. However, I am back now, so we're going to start up again with the videos. Ideally, I'm going to be doing at least one a week, hopefully a little bit more than that, so that we can get through the remainder of the Sweeney and crime drama, and then I'll be looking at some of the new units for those of you who are in year 10. Some of those topics have changed slightly, and we'll be just adding videos to everything that we've got going at the moment. So a few shout outs during my break. Big shout out to Ella, to Lissa, Ruby, Lewis, and also to Emily. Thank you guys so much for subscribing. So, for those of you who are doing crime drama, not only do you need to know Luther Season 1 Episode 1, but you also need to know Season 1 Episode 1 of The Sweeney. Now this is more difficult to find. It's not something that is available on things like Netflix and that sort of stuff. So I managed to find a link through Dailymotion to Season 1 Episode 1 of The Sweeney. I'm not sure how you guys have been told to watch it in class, so it might be worthwhile checking with your teachers to see where they want you to view this from home. Either way, we start off with this production company and the logo, which is displayed obviously as recognition and credit. It identifies the production as a very British production because of the Thames and also because of the recognisable landmarks in the background of this logo. And we open up with a sort of what we would class as an opening sequence. So rather than going straight into the credits and the title sequence, we've got a little bit of action happening first, which is a similarity to Luther. So the opening sequence reveals sort of contemporary details, because here we've got a paper with details about jockeys who were very famous during the 1970s. These are things that the audience would be very familiar with, but it also obviously helps to date the programme. If we were watching this now, we wouldn't understand that as much because obviously it's not set during the sort of 2020. The first shot that we get is of the character Brooker. Now, he's shown as a close-up but also profile where we see him side on. Now, this provides enigma because he's using indirect mode of address. We don't know what he's looking at, and it makes the audience wonder, obviously, what's going to happen next. What part of the plot are we going to see? We then get a point of view shot which reveals further enigma. We get some indication that this is a covert meeting because he does flash his lights at the van and then they drive off to this secluded setting. However, when we see the gun that's hidden in the back of the van, we know now that these characters are villains. Now, this is a very common convention of the period. We reveal the criminals before the title sequence to give some idea of what the narrative of the episode is going to be like. Now, another thing that tells us that these guys are villains is the fact that they've disguised the van. And that not only tells us that they're villainous characters, but it's also a convention of crime dramas as a whole to have an element of disguise in it. Now, a further character is revealed, but it's later established that this is a minor character. It's not someone who reappears throughout. So it's an interesting look at how we, in some crime dramas, have nothing but major characters, but in others we have minor characters as well. Now, the vast amounts of money that Brooker has suggests that whoever he is and whoever he works for has a very profitable business. It also shows a payoff happening, which is conventional for the genre as a whole. Now, following this, we go into the title sequence. And the title sequence is where we have this blue tinted sort of time lapse or stop motion action where we sort of see lots of different things happening. Now, the blue is very important because the police were, particularly back in the 70s and still are to an extent, known as the thin blue line. So it's an indication, if you like, that this is a crime drama. The fact that it's tinted blue, though, obviously tells us that this is the title credits. Now we've got enigmatic details such as the feet on the pedals, the hands on the steering wheel to create suspense because we can't see who it is, who's driving. The title sequence also has a lot of different camera angles. So we've seen one which is a long shot. Now we've got a close-up, we've got extreme close-ups, and these are cut together so that the motion doesn't move, it doesn't flow very easily. It's sort of a bit jumpy. So we would class this as perhaps stop motion or a lot of cut sequences. Now we get the name of the programme displayed in white capital sans serif font to stand out, but it also shows the seriousness and sophistication surrounding the production and the idea that we're meant to take this more seriously. The name, the Sweeney, comes from Cockney rhyming slang, so the branch of the police that the characters work in is called the Flying Squad. This rhymes with Sweeney Todd and is then shortened to Sweeney, just in case we didn't know where it came from. We've got product placement of the car, so even back in the 70s we've got product placement and synergy being used. We've then got the characters displayed in order of importance along with the actor who plays them. Now the show comes from a special production that was just called Regan, so this indicates that obviously Regan is going to be the protagonist, he's going to be the main character, and for those audiences who had seen the one-off production, they would be more likely then to watch this as well. Carter being displayed straight after Regan is an indication that he is the helper or sidekick to the main character, whereas Haskins, we can clearly see here, is Regan's boss. One of the ways that we can tell that is because of the way that he's dressed. Also, we can tell that through the way that he's shot here, through the fact that he's pointing directly at us and seems to be sort of more controlling. Although at times it might seem like he's sort of villainous because he gets in Regan's way, we would consider him to be the dispatcher overall. Now, as the two other characters are displayed without images, it's likely that they're not going to appear in every episode, and certainly by the time we get to the end of this episode, we know that Brian Blessed isn't going to make another appearance as Kemble, but because they're well-known actors, they're going to bring in additional audiences and they're going to be a draw for the production. We then have action sequences being shown. These are very conventional to crime, but they add a subgenre of action to the production as well. Now we end the title sequence with the title of the episode as a whole and also the writer, so again providing credit. And then we get into the episode as a whole. So the first character seen after the title sequence is instantly recognisable because we've seen him in that title sequence itself. So this is Regan here, and the fact that he's getting up perhaps indicates a new day from what we've seen in the opening sequence as a whole. Now he walks into a very messy lounge, which combined with the robe that he's wearing subverts the expectations of what we would expect of a detective. Now we also get an insight into Regan's personal life, so we get a greater connection to him because we've seen different sides of his personality. The close-up on the watch, combined with the facial expressions that we have from Regan, add to the narrative, but they also again help us to create that connection because we relate to the fact that he's slept in and he's late for his job. That's something that many audience members are likely to have done themselves. We then cut to the police station where we have this office that seems very bright, very organised, but there's a lack of people, which makes Regan's absence seem more noticeable. We then get an over-the-shoulder shot, so we feel like we're part of the team, and it involves us more heavily in the narrative. Now, we've seen all of the main characters now from the title sequence when we see Haskins coming down the corridor, and again we get this reinforced idea that Haskins is at odds with the rest of the team, given how formally he's dressed and how perhaps he's more in charge because he seems very imposing. He seems to dominate the corridor through this long shot here. We cut back to Regan and we get this idea that again we're subverting expectations. The decor in the room seems completely feminine, whereas Regan is presented as traditionally masculine for the period, and we see this when he teases Jenny, who is under the covers. Now this obviously suggests that the place that he's staying is her house and not his. We then get a really interesting camera shot of Regan where it makes it seem like he's being followed, but interestingly we as the audience are put in the position where we're the ones who seem to be viewing him secretly or covertly. Cutting back to the police station, the conversation between Haskins and the others in the in the shot here is done so in a way that makes, again, us feel like we're part of the team. We also get to see the hierarchy of the characters because Haskins is standing, so he's physically above the other characters. We get contrast between Carter and Haskins viewed through the high angle that we see looking down onto Carter to make him seem smaller, but we then have a low angle straight after this looking up at Haskins to make him seem more powerful, which sort of reinforces what we said in the previous shot. We then cut to the long shot of the new character, John, who has very formal dress codes. They make him seem very important because we can tell that there's a difference to the clothes here compared to what Carter or what Regan are wearing. Even though we're not very familiar with 1970s fashion living in 2020, it is something that we can just spot from sort of viewing this here. And another thing that makes him seem important is the fact that he's in the centre of the frame, and he sort of stays in the centre of the frame as he moves and walks towards the camera. Now we then have a camera which would be recognisable to the contemporary audience, the audience watching it in 1970, but to us as a modern audience we might not recognise it. It also seems here very similar to a gun, even though it's just mounted on a sort of, not a tripod, but something to make it easier for Regan to take those camera shots from a long distance. Another item that dates the programme is the police notebook. Now this is very traditional, and even though the modern police today still use a notebook, it seems to be something that is associated with tradition and with the past. It's also a very important convention of the genre, given that we would expect the police to be making notes in some way, shape or form. We then get another extreme close-up of the thermos, making it clear that this is some sort of surveillance, but we get enigma because we wonder who is conducting the surveillance and who they are watching. Now this is answered quite quickly when we see in the next shot John in that sort of viewfinder. Now this makes it seem like us as the audience are looking through that camera lens and that we're conducting the surveillance ourselves. We get more synergy and product placement with the Novello brand name for the camera, which again creates a sort of promotion within the episode as a whole. We then see Brooker from prior to the title sequence, so this links John and Brooker together. We know that Brooker's a criminal. If John's meeting with him, then it's likely to mean that they are both criminals working together. So we're slowly starting to work out what's happening in this episode as a whole. Now the setting seems more modern compared with the police station, but it also contrasts with the garage that Regan has been surveilling. So in terms of our setting, that's quite important, and I will be doing another video on settings as a whole where we'll break it down in a little bit more detail. We then have this shot of the gold lighter. Now this is clearly displayed as a sense of how wealthy the characters are, but it's also on top of a map, so it suggests a level of planning, and it's an exclusive for us because we get to understand what the criminals in this instance are planning, so it provides us with an element of dramatic irony. We now know more than the police do. We then have a close-up which provides us with some answers, because we know obviously now that this is part of the criminal activity. We know who's in charge of the planning, so it suggests to us that John is fairly high up within this organisation. However, he's not as high up as Kemble here, okay, or Brian Blessed. So we can see through this over-the-shoulder shot that the positions of the characters indicate how wealthy they are. The fact that Kemble is behind the desk shows that he's in charge. He's surrounded by this sort of wealthy upper-class props and decor. It seems very elegant, it seems very extravagant. But we are also positioned in this place of a criminal because we're sort of behind Brooker and John here, so it's almost like we're part of the team. Having looked at Kemble and sort of understanding a little bit more about his character, we then have a scene change which reveals other criminal activity. So we can see through these characters, Billy and Stupid, that they're checking cars to see whether there are any unlocked. Now they don't seem to have any link at the moment to the organisation that Kemble is running, but it's again indicative of this crime genre that we are seeing different elements of crime. So we've gone from high organised crime to sort of petty criminals here. Now the fact that the place name is so prominent provides a level of relatability for the audience, but it also helps to set the production. So the Sweeney happens in West London. The audience would also recognise Regan's car in the next shot, which provides an element of foreshadowing, because now we know that given these two petty criminals are checking cars, Regan's car is right there, that something is going to happen. We would not expect, though, for a detective to have left their car unlocked, so it seems quite ironic that the car of a police officer is getting broken into. Now, as Regan is on the phone in the foreground, the background reveals the two characters breaking into the car, so this provides two elements of actions for us to take in and is quite an interesting shot, particularly when we continue to view the action through the glass in the phone box. Now, the phone box, again, is something that would date the programme, but it is also another interesting camera shot here that you might want to comment on if it comes up in your exam. Now, as Regan reaches the car, suspense and tension are raised. The audience wonder who is going to prevail. Is he going to catch the criminals? Are they going to get away? And in the long shot, we see this comic relief as they manage to make it away from Regan and he sort of falls over. It sets him up to be an unlikely hero, because at the moment everything we've seen of Regan makes him seem not only very human, but sort of like things happen to him in a way that makes him very lucky. Now, the low angle that we have on Billy makes him seem taller, more powerful, particularly given that he's just bested Regan. And when we get another low angle shot, which again uses this sort of comic relief, because we are viewing Regan, who is sort of in a compromised position at this point, having to change his trousers. The hierarchy between Regan and Carter is more balanced in the next scene, though, where they're viewed on the same level. The fact that they're getting changed and they're having this conversation in a storage room, though, makes it seem like the conversation they're having is somewhat secretive. So again, as an audience, we feel like we're being let in on something more interesting that perhaps other characters don't know. In the middle shot, we have Haskins in the background. It makes him seem like he's pursuing Carter and Regan, and so we start to get a better understanding of the relationships between the characters. Regan doesn't seem to be all that fussed as to what's happening, whereas Carter is the one who's sort of having to go back and stall him. Now, Billy and Stupid seem like they're very clumsy, very immature through the way that they're behaving with the camera, and interestingly, Stupid isn't given any name throughout the series. He's referred to only, or through this episode is known only as Stupid. So the name sort of indicates what we can expect from him as a character. Now, the images add tension to the narrative because we as an audience know who they are of and where they were taken and why they were taken, which then sort of branches off onto a subplot, which is, although it's a subplot in that we've just seen Billy and Stupid steal the car, we want to know how they're going to get the car back, it is starting to knit together because we see that Billy knows who the images are of, and so we start to see where this episode is going. Now, this cuts to a shop with a lot of memorabilia in it, and it potentially cause contrasting responses in the audience. Some of the audience would find nostalgia in the items that are on show, but there are at least 2 swastikas that are on view which could cause anger in others. Regan and Carter seem to know the place that they are at, though, so this suggests that the setting is familiar to them. It also provides enigma because we wonder why they are there, who they're going to speak to, who could have the information that they want. Now, the informant that they're talking to is not stereotypical. He's an ex-sergeant, so we wouldn't necessarily expect him to be all-knowing within the neighbourhood, but as an older person, it's likely that he might know more about what's going on. Now, the extreme close-up on the pin suggests its significance, but it also shows how Regan is connected to the community that he serves. He manages to get the information out of the guy known as Soldier. We then cut to a conversation between Billy and Brooker. The characters seem more significant now, given that we're viewing them through the car, because it makes it seem like what they're talking about, again, is sort of exclusive and secret. Again, we get this idea of dramatic irony, because they know information that Regan doesn't right now, and they're sort of sharing it with us. Stupid, on the other hand, sort of fulfills this trope of the clumsy criminal. He's portrayed in a way that shows he's completely unaware of Regan entering the garage, and again sort of links to his name of Stupid. Regan also displays a period in time where the police were sort of under more scrutiny for their behaviour. So when he slaps the cigarette out of Stupid's face, the violence that he's displaying here we would today not expect the police to be doing that, but back in the 1970s wasn't uncommon. The pictures that Regan has taken are clearly important. They show the faces of the criminals, suggest they're going to make good evidence, and so now we realise as audience why they're so important. We also get an element of contrast because Billy is shown as being quite awkward and clearly out of his depth with Kemble, despite the fact that there is a family connection here. So Billy's older brother clearly worked for Kemble and was caught by the police and was put away by them. So the fact that Billy's sort of standing there looking a little bit awkward makes him seem out of place and shows again the difference between the two levels of criminality. Kemble, though, is shown to be very smart and intelligent through the way that he takes his time over decisions. He's only ever viewed at the moment through wealthy settings, surrounded by high-class items. So again, reinforcing this idea that he's at the head of the organisation. The way that Brooker pays Billy is very similar to the beginning of the programme, where he's paying the driver, so this is very recognisable. Shows that the boy is perhaps more intellectual than stupid, says that Billy is more intellectual than stupid because he knew that there was going to be some sort of monetary compensation involved for him. We then get a close-up shot of the commander at the police station, and we can tell the difference between Kemble and the commander, even though they're both positioned in a way that sort of creates a connection between them. They're both sitting down, they both have pipes, they're both high class, they're both dressed very formally. We can tell that the commander is part of the police and part of the good guys through where he's sitting. We get a lot of enigma though, because initially it's not very clear that he is the commander or why he's going to be involved in this narrative. When we see Haskins coming in, we know that he's going to be the boss, and the over-the-shoulder shot reveals Haskins' awkwardness, similar to how Billy was being awkward with Kemble. Now we get another shot of the garage where Stupid was being held. Carter appearing behind Billy makes it clear that Regan had set a trap to catch him. This again is a common convention of policing and crime dramas as a whole. Now in the over-the-shoulder shot, and there's a lot of over-the-shoulder shots in this episode as a whole, we can see that Billy has got no way of escape, which implies that sort of the dramatic irony that we had with Kemble is going to be revealed to Regan. However, Billy manages to make his way out. It's very typical of criminal characters to sort of find a way out, but it also adds action to the subplot because now we've got a chase scene. As Regan appears to have lost Billy, Carter views him in the background going up the ladder. This raises tension for us as the audience because we want to know if he's going to get away or if he's going to be caught. The bird's eye view that we have as Regan follows him creates more tension. We see how wobbly that ladder is. We emphasise how far it would be for either of the characters to fall. And we then have enigma because we wonder why Carter is running in a different direction. Where's he going? We can assume that it's going to be to sort of catch the criminal and to box him into a corner, but we're not sure of that at the moment. Again, the emphasis of the station name provides relatability to the audience, but it also allows for Billy to escape because now that we know he's at a train station, we know that there's lots of routes out for him. And we can see that to an extent in that middle shot when the train door is open. This suggests that perhaps Billy's going to escape, even though that we can see Regan following close behind. Carter can be seen through bird's eye view and again contrasts this idea of Billy at the station where we saw him from a very low angle looking up. Unclear still where Carter is running to and why. However, when we see them both box him in, we sort of have this sense of relief. The good guys have won a little bit. They find a knife in his back pocket, so again that's a very common convention of crime dramas. Regan has won this battle, as we've said, but again we also get an element of that violence that the police had as they sort of manhandled Billy quite roughly. Now we get a break here, which creates a little bit of relief for the audience following the chase. The explanation of the name can also be seen tiled in the background. So on one line you've got Flying Squad, underneath you've got Sweeney Todd. So again, explaining the name of the show. Following the break, there's a new scene where the two men corner Jenny. Now, their deception is expected. Again, we've got this disguise, which is a common convention of the genre. The over-the-shoulder shot makes Jenny seem smaller and more vulnerable. Her naivety creates foreshadowing for what is going to happen next, when she sort of trips the men up into admitting that they're from the police, but they don't know Regan. Now, we get that sort of foreshadowing appearing very, very quickly. Jenny is put into the position of a damsel in distress, very common for crime drama and action genres and for the period as a whole, but we also have this raised tension through the fact that the threat of violence is posed here. It's very common for crime, and we have seen violence in sort of previous bits of the episode as well, through the way that the police were manhandling Billy. The scene change, when we go back to the police station, shows how unaware Regan is of what is happening. So we can imagine through these two cut shots here that what's happening to Jenny is happening simultaneously in sort of time to Regan and Carter here. Regan's importance is emphasised by the fact that he's in the foreground. Carter is also made to seem sort of more comical through the fact that he's eating a yoghurt, which doesn't seem important, but the fact that Regan makes fun of it sort of adds a feminine quality to Carter, perhaps. Now, Kemble seems more aggressive through the shot of him in profile, and these final two shots together I thought were quite interesting. So we have a sort of layered effect here. The two men who were threatening Regan's partner Jenny can be seen. We've got Brooker in the background. We're going to have John coming up in a minute. But enigma is raised to her fate. We don't really know how they left her. The idea was that she wasn't harmed, but we're not sure. What's interesting about these two shots, though, is that we have this layering effect. Brooker is in the background and Kemble is then in front of him. But as Kemble moves sort of towards the left-hand side of the screen, John appears in front of him. So we're constantly having somebody new put into the foreground and given more emphasis and importance. When we cut to the new setting, we as an audience instantly recognise it as Jenny's lounge. We know that Carter and Regan are at her house, but we still don't know the fate of her just yet until we pan to see Regan comforting her and we know that she's okay. So Regan fulfills his role as hero by coming to her rescue, but he also adds to his sort of masculine representation by being strong for her. Now, the scene that we have on the very right-hand side of the screen is very reminiscent from the beginning of the episode. Regan appears to be more in control now, which again is what we would expect of a detective and also of this traditional masculine portrayal. The shot that we have where they're both sitting down on the sofa, though, emphasises Carter, who appears to be in the foreground. We can also start to see a pattern for the show as a whole, where we've got a lot of profile shots or shots that are taken side on to a character, which suggests that this is something we would expect of the series as a whole. Now, in the 1970s, feminism and pushing for equal rights was becoming more prominent, so it was quite modern for the time to have a female police officer coming into the show like this. The Rolls Royce that we then cut to is again product placement, but again emphasising the wealth that Kemble holds. And as the car moves towards the camera, we get a extreme close up on the emblem of the Rolls Royce, which is the spirit of ecstasy. Now, this is sort of emphasising, again, placing greater emphasis on the wealth that Kemble has, but could also show his control over women because the figure is a woman, as well as indicating that the crisis point of the narrative is perhaps nearing here. Now, Kemble's meeting with the man in the car suggests that he's got control of people in high places and could represent the corrupt nature of businesses, particularly the police force in the UK at the time. We then cut to a red light, which is indicative of a dark room, also connotes danger and potentially death as well. The man with Regan is again another minor character. He's stereotypical for a photographer and seems quite nerd-like to us as a modern audience, but he would be stereotypical for the period. Another criminal, Driscoll, that we're viewing through the photographs here, indicates where the narrative is going to go to next. And we would expect that to be the next shot, but interestingly what we have here is sort of like many shots sort of sandwiched together, where we go from the police to the criminals, and the police to the criminals, to the police to the criminals again. So it's sort of like going from Regan to Kemble, all the way through the episode. So although we would expect to see Driscoll next, what we find is Brooker with the soldier from earlier. This raises tension with the audience because we know Brooker means business, and we start to feel fear for this older man. This tension and fear is then raised even further through the close-up shots that we have. The fact that there's contact between the two, even though it's only minimal, helps to raise the suspense. And in fact, it raises the suspense more by the fact that we don't see any physical violence here, because we're constantly left on alert. As we've said, we then have this sort of sandwich effect where we cut back to Regan. Now, the greyhound is symbolic of gambling, which again could be associated with crime during the period. And the appearance of Regan and Carter implies that Driscoll is again going to be brought closer to justice, and it's another criminal who they're going to have to deal with. Now, the shots of the interview with Driscoll are interspersed with shots of the greyhound, which could be representative of the fact that Regan is chasing down the case and chasing down leads, but could also be indicative of the criminals trying to evade crime. So we've got different readings applicable to this particular shot here. Now, the close-up of all three men following this adds pressure to the conversation, because we can see the nervous gestures of Driscoll, who's being interviewed at the time. We then have an extreme close-up of the gun from earlier, which again connotes aggression and danger and foreshadows the later narrative. We hadn't seen the gun for a while, so we had it right at the beginning of the opening sequence. We've got it again here. We know that this is going to be an important prop that's going to appear throughout the episode as a whole. Now, Kemble in the garage seems to subvert expectations. He's not been viewed somewhere so dirty at the moment. Now, even though the camera faces Kemble and Brooker, they're using the indirect mode of address again, and it creates a barrier between us and the characters. We don't connect with them as much as we connect with Regan and Carter, who have looked at the camera previously. And we see them on the right-hand side in the marketplace. Again, it's representative of London, would be recognisable to the audience. It makes it easier for us to relate to Regan and helps to position us as an audience supporting the good guys. Now, Regan uses multiple sources across the show. We had the soldier, then we had Driscoll, now we've got a lady sort of here. This shows that he knows the area really well, and so may be considered to be sort of traditional or proper policing, the idea of a Bobby on the beat, if you like, actually interacting with the community who he's meant to serve. We then get more close-up shots of the gun. The extreme close-up that we have here, though, emphasises the fact that it's now loaded. So again, we're adding to that suspense and danger. The office that we saw earlier is now viewed with multiple characters and action, so it creates a sense that the repair stage of the narrative is being fulfilled at the moment. And in the interview room, we again get this subverted expectations. The interview room actually seems quite warm, so through the lighting, the colour on the walls, the table and the sort of more comfortable chairs that we can see here, it's not what we would expect of a police interview in a police station. Certainly contrasts to what we've seen in Luther. So it sort of puts us at odds with the police, but it might be a way of them getting the information that they need. We also have some more 180-degree panning as the camera literally moves around the table with Carter as he takes a seat. The logo of the van links back to the beginning of the episode, so we may be aware of the fact that the van was camouflaged as both a flower van and an ambulance, but for those who perhaps had forgotten, it's another reminder here and shows that it's going to be important later on in the episode. Now, the shot of the tyres and the metal bars that the men hold shows how quickly the gang are mobilising. It quickens the pace of the narrative. It shows that Regan is running out of time, which we can sort of see in the middle shot here. So Carter's tie is now sort of loosened, Regan's shirt sleeves are rolled up, showing that things are getting serious. Billy's mum could sort of represent the good cop, bad cop trope, which we see traditionally in American dramas, where Carter started off and he was being quite kind to Billy's mum, but then Regan comes in and plays that bad cop. We then have Kemble talking on a walkie-talkie. Checking the watch adds again to the suspense for the action that we know is about to happen. We cut to the other two men in the car, showing that Kemble's still able to control what's happening even though he's not with them directly. And very quickly we have another cut to the commander. Now we've got an interesting camera angle that creates enigma, even though that we can guess who is going to be in this room. We don't know for sure as we're viewing it sort of at a very low angle through the arms of who are Regan and Haskins. Now Haskins seems awkward and uneasy, while Regan has more confidence, showing the different personalities, despite the fact that Haskins legitimately has more power than Regan does. The look that Regan gives the boss at the end of the conversation shows how sort of he pushes against this red tape and bureaucracy, very similar to Luther. And we then follow a sort of tracking shot of the police moving. Now this creates further tension of the narrative and provides opposition between good guys and bad guys, particularly as we have sort of movement from the criminals revealing the gun and sort of suggesting that the police are walking into this life and death situation that at the minute they're still quite unaware of. Now the car provides enigma because we're unaware of who is in the car at the moment and who they're surveilling, but this is later revealed to be Kemble. However, there's also a montage of different cars that provide further enigma. So we've got Kemble's car, we've got the ambulance, we've got Brooker's car, we've got the police and how they're mobilising. So again, it all adds to this sort of tense action and enigmatic sequence. We're quite surprised, though, when we see Haskins pull up at Prosser's house. We know that he was working for Kemble, so initially it brings Haskins' character under question, but it is later revealed that Haskins is bringing him to justice, which shows, like we said at the beginning, how Haskins sometimes appears to be villainous and working against Regan, but is actually on the side of good. Now, the ambulance passing the police provides an element of comedy as well as dramatic irony because we realise that it's not a proper ambulance, even though the police don't. It also adds tension because we realise that the criminal in the police van must be the one that they are trying to break out at this point. The two men the view of the two men on the left-hand side sort of conceals their conversation because we are in the position of Prosser's wife viewing this through a window. We then have this sort of cut to the setting, which is sort of quite derelict and away from civilization, showing where the action is going to happen. And the fact that these cuts from one bit to another are happening very, very quickly shows how the action part of the show is sort of becoming more prevalent than the crime drama side at the moment. We're pushing the pace, we're making it seem quicker, we're adding to that tension and suspense all the way through. Now, the lorry that was seen by the audience with all the tyres on it can be seen on the left-hand side of the final shot here. Now, we know that those guys are working for the bad guys, but this is confirmed when they divert the police off the road and the action begins almost immediately with the police being put into peril. The fighting connotes the action genre and shows that each of the characters from Kemble's team, it shows them to be more brutal, which we've not seen so far, so illustrating how criminals can not only be quite smart and quite calculating, but can also be quite violent at the same time. However, knocking out the man with the car door provides an element of comic relief. It makes the fighting seem less realistic, lowers the tension slightly because that's been raised all the way through, and we can't just keep raising tension. We've got to sort of have these peaks and troughs with tension, otherwise the audience are going to switch off. Regan also again shows a more traditional view of policing in which they were more physical and violent when he starts fighting with the men. Kemble also gets involved, so again this could perhaps represent the idea that within criminal activity and within what the audience believe of criminal activity, there's this sort of hierarchy where you start at the bottom and work your way up, which is potentially what Kemble has done here. Now it looks like Kemble is going to get away until Regan appears at the window, and it illustrates the face-off between the two characters, which we knew was going to happen right from the beginning of the episode. The gun that's been foreshadowed since the beginning is also seen, but it's very, very significant now because we know that, again, that this is loaded. and it sort of raises this question as to who is going to be killed. Now, it's not entirely unexpected that Kemble was the one to die, but the fact that he was shot by not only one of his own men, but somebody who appears to be quite a good friend of Kemble is very ironic. The bird's eye view show how far Kemble has fallen literally and metaphorically, which could provide multiple readings here. Before we get to the end of the episode, so we have a couple of other shots, one that shows Regan and Carter from a low angle. It makes them seem more dominant and powerful because of this, but it also emphasises how they've not come out of this unscathed. They're both sort of messed up. Regan has obviously got a cut lip and you can see he's starting to bruise. So they've not come out of this completely unscathed, but have prevailed at the end. And when we see Regan with Jenny at the end of the show, we have this sort of cyclical narrative where we end almost where we began, and shows him as sort of the winner of the battle. He's also gained the princess, which we would expect if we were looking at this through props theory. We then have the end credits, which I'm not going to go over completely, but just to sort of show the house theme of blue is continued all the way through the programme, as well as showing shots of Regan and his team now together rather than separate. Hopefully that's helpful. Here are all of our key terms from today. Perhaps have a go at making your own case study, taking individual segments of that Regan episode and maybe breaking it down into more detail. If you have any questions, comments, you can pop them in the comment section below. You can also get in touch with me through Twitter at media_revision. If you want a shout out, please subscribe, hit the button down below, and if you hit the bell icon next to it, you get notifications every time I post a new video. I'm going to be breaking down this episode just like I did with Luther, so over the next few days expect analysis of props, settings, costumes, all that sort of stuff. So I shall see you guys later for another video.